Hello and welcome back to Explosive Kolonisation. So, just to start us off today, I saw a video from Vals, I think that's how you pronounce it, and he made a very interesting SSTO, and I was testing mine. So I thought I'd put this in because this is one of the funniest accidents I've had in KSB without an explosion. So I'll launch it up. I use, I've forgotten the name of it now, HyperEdit, that's the one, to remove all the fuel, just to test its landing, and it turns out that I have made a perfectly balanced craft that lands in reverse. I tested everything full and empty inside the spaceplane hangar, and yeah, it lands backwards perfectly, so I thought I'd keep that in. Now on with the rest of it. So what we're doing here is, towards the end of the last episode, I just had one of my rocket part ferries that were essentially stuck in orbit around about Minmus, or just in orbit waiting to be dropped back down. And this one is actually the older one, and I had a lot of problems docking this, so I decided to gently crash it so that I could recycle it. Obviously if it's close enough to the base I can recycle it into equipment I can then turn into rocket parts to make more things. And this base has a mixture of things on it. Sorry it's a bit dark, it's just exactly where I was filming it at the wrong time. So out comes a little Kerbal to do a bit of recycling, and once I get over there I notice that our little Kerbal isn't experienced enough. And this is the guy that was most experienced. I think he's 2 stars. But he was the most experienced one I could find. And I was sure that there was somebody here that had more than that because I've recycled stuff here before. I couldn't quite figure out what was going on with this. So in the meantime I decided to have a look at some strange issues. As you can see here I'm clicking on one of the on the rover that's attached to it, and I noticed that there's a problem. So I double check the connections here, click it all back on, and it all seems to connect fine. And on returning into Tent City, I discovered that I'm still not getting access to the rover, and the reason I'm not getting access is because it's not connected still, and that's where my 4-star Kerbal is. And the reason being is, as you can see there, that little port just drops off. It wasn't properly, it had become detached from the landing thing. So after getting everything correctly attached, and then discovering that I do have a 4-star Kerbal, we go over for the bit of recycling. And then after this, we're going to send up the ferry with some parts to finish off some things that we need done. Yeah. Every time that happens when it's not on the camera, it makes me terrified. But yeah, after the recycling, we just head back up with our... This is the more advanced out of the rocket part shuttles. Now, the problem I was having with the previous one was that I couldn't get it docked because the RCS wasn't holding it straight. It was waving all over the place. And essentially I've discovered that I didn't have an extra reaction wheel on this, and the one that was in the command pod just wasn't strong enough for the size of ship. So it was causing me a fair amount of problems. And that was when full and empty. It was a problem landing it. So I've sort of resigned myself at this point because of how long it's taken to get things sorted. As you can see here, this docking was a nightmare. And I'm right on the port and it's still drifting off slowly. So I decide that I'm going to design something else for doing this job. They also happen to have the Mark IV RCS on there, and Mark IV hasn't technically been updated for 1.3 yet. I'm actually using the dev build, basically because I use the RCS ports on a lot of the stuff that I build. However, now OPT Spaceplanes mod has come out with an RCS variant that fits a lot better with what I do. And between their RCS and the RCS that has come out with Nearty's spaceship, the launcher platform mod, one of the near future mods anyways. Essentially I don't need the Mark IV for the moment. I don't really use the hull that much. So we just moving about some one of the little landers. Now this ship I designed, I showed it last time, and it was just designed to take Kerbals up and down, and my plan was to take it down to the base and just lift up some Kerbals for the moment. And unfortunately, something goes horribly wrong and we impact at speed. I don't know quite what was going on. I think the actual thrusters were imbalanced when I started using monopropellant. However, on to the next launch. So, people will remember that I brought the ship, the liquid fuel freighter, back from Minmus. And this is my little bootstrapping ship that I'm trying to launch. I tried to launch this last time and it exploded the space plane that it was in, which is still in orbit. But this is just the exact same bootstrapper, it's just launched to a reusable rocket, which unfortunately can't be reused after this. But I just get this up and then return the rocket, and unfortunately I don't have enough delta V. No, I do have enough delta V, I'm telling a lie. I believe one of the fuel tanks overheated. The fuel tanks on the near future launchers pack, I think it is. The new pack that's there, the fuel tanks don't have a very high heat tolerance, and I've lost a few of them so far trying to get used to the re-entry from the packs. But I missed a bit of footage out there. It got corrupted, I don't know what happened to it. But we just get our launcher connected, make sure the reactor's offline, using the solar panels to power everything for a moment, that's why we have them all on there. And transfer across some of the nuclear fuel so that we have uranium to power the reactor. And then we're just removing the bootstrapper. It's still got a bit of fuel, but I've transferred over most of the liquid fuel. I think it's still got a bit of oxidizer in it. But it still has a lot of uranium for the reactor, so I'm not going to deorbit it, I'm just going to leave it there for the moment. And then that is our fuel ferry ready to go. I'm not quite sure which way it's going to go yet, whether it's going to go out to Juna or whether it's going to go down to Eve, because I'm sending a few things to Eve this time. But as I mentioned a second ago, here is the plane that exploded last time. And part of the footage I lost was actually bringing most of the crew back from this. So I brought all the crew back and I just left one pilot in to see if they could land it. And I also brought up a KISS set and put an ejection system onto this just in case. Because I did not expect this to go well, essentially trying to land a space plane that doesn't have its wings. But I do have a couple of control surfaces, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Obviously I've got the tilted fins at the back and the winglets at the front, and this is the lifting body, so it seems to work out quite well. There's just an actual speed landing. It was pretty fast, but it stayed together, and I do not know what exploded. That solar panel is just sticking out because it's broken, and this was before I updated to the latest version, so there were still a few bugs with that particular solar panel type. But using RCS, because it's fairly strong in this, I managed to get it back. And because I installed an ejection seat, and Kerbals are notorious for playing with things, somebody gets ejected. But onwards! So, I was spending a bit of time messing about with this, and I did it in the main save by accident, essentially. I didn't do it in Skunkworks. But because I did it in the main save and there's a lot of stuff to mess about with, I thought this would be very good. And this is essentially, I'm designing a lander, a gliding lander for Eve. And this was my first bit of testing, so I thought I'd put it in to show everybody. It's just a little rocket power engine, that's why it's rocket and not jet fueled. Obviously I could get a lot more delta V if I had it jet fueled and just liquid fuel, but I'm going to be running it in an atmosphere that doesn't have that ability. And that little craft you saw it launch from was just something I threw together quickly. But this is... So what I do is I send them out to different places, and I'm trying to land them on different places and get a little bit more science at the same time. There are still some weird hotspots that I'm missing some science from. But this is a little bit of a rougher landing than normal. Obviously I'm landing uphill and at a little bit of speed. And I managed to crack the engine off the floor. But everything else is still intact. So not too bad at all. And then we go back to our station. Now that our rocket parts have been delivered and we've created a few things, it's time to drop this fuel container down. And I decide, because I want an engineer at one of the other bases, and it was just time it was passing. I decided to get my fuel base assembled because I've forgotten to do it for quite a while. So we just land there, and as you can see by that tilt, this is the problem I'm having, is that I need the RCS to stabilise these things, but they don't really have the amount of RCS to stabilise constantly. So that ship's just a bit of a pain for me. I get all the parts of this base all linked up together and get it drilling, and then try and move this and get way too close. And then it tilts over because I can't really control it, and it gets bounced forwards by its landing legs. And yeah, everything's going sideways. So I decided to take a Kerbal over and just pull off some parts that I can use. Radio antenna and a couple of solar panels, the two that weren't broken. And we just attach them onto the base to give us a bit more power for running things. And I think it looks quite smart as well. So that's a liquid fuel base. It needs more storage for the actual liquid fuel, which will be coming soon. But for the moment that'll do us. And then on a bit of a second test, this is another plane that I was sort of designing as a dropship for Eve at some point. But I was testing a few things at the same time, and again I thought I'd just keep this in because it's quite interesting. This was actually an atmospheric skimmer, so it can bounce across the atmosphere. It can't get into orbit, but it can bounce across the atmosphere. But from this I decided to launch a few little planes. If you don't recognise this, you've got a very short attention span. But yeah, I just thought I'd fly these out, and I was actually aiming for a specific place. There's one place I don't have science from in Kerbal. I don't have any of the science from it, so I was aiming from that, but I was a little bit short on my calculations. But I flew a few of these planes out and dropped them at different places, and they appear fairly stable. Now, I haven't tested them at Eve yet, and my main concern is the re-entry. But from what I think, even if I lose complete control, providing I've got the air brakes deployed, they should be stable going through the atmosphere, so we'll see what happens when I get there. But here we're just launching for the drifter ship, which is heading to Eve. This is launching our heat shields. We need two of the heat shields for the landers. Obviously the landers they don't have the jet propulsion to be able to land on Eve without burning up. So it has to be done a slightly different way this time. So I've created these, and essentially they're a small fuel tank, some RCS fuel, and some equipment as well. And I put the equipment on because I wanted something heavy to tilt it towards the towards our actual heat shield. And then again the heat shield's on at the end. So that's just everything sorted. A heat shield on both of the landers, which will be very interesting because I have to try and land them very close to each other. So that should be curious. I'm tempted to actually join them together and send them completely through the atmosphere as the one thing. I'm not quite sure about that yet, but we'll see what happens. The problem is that I'm sending all of this stuff, and I need to send a Kerbal down, so I could lose a Kerbal on re-entry because this hasn't really been tested. But here we are, just tweaking our final interception for Eve, getting it nice and close but not touching the atmosphere. You want to use the Oberth effect as much as possible so that we can slow down with the least amount of delta V, but the drifter has a good amount of delta V, so it should be fairly fine. And here we are back at the factory, and we have two things that are being built at the same time. So this was just another little section. This is more of a crew section, again just for replacing that part that exploded. Now I've got two of these and they both have distinct differences. The one that crashed was actually, it could carry a little bit of crew, but it was mainly meant for carrying KISS parts. It had a big tank for carrying the KISS parts, whereas this one is more designed for carrying extra crew down. Has a little bit of extra delta V. But here we go, just docking it nice and slowly. It's not often I keep all of this stuff in, so I thought I would. And then once this is docked, just time warp ahead by literally a single orbit. and we have our liquid fuel ferry. Liquid hydrogen ferry, should I say. Now, there is a problem with this that I noticed fairly quickly, and that is that I don't have any oxidizer on the station. And because I don't have any oxidizer, the actual engine on this runs on liquid hydrogen and oxidizer, which is fine when it's on the ground. I can refuel it from both of the bases. The problem is I can't get it to the ground because it's not strong enough to land on the RCS. So I've put a bit of liquid hydrogen on it so that the RCS can be used, because obviously that runs liquid hydrogen. Now, just deploying the solar panels. This is one of the few ships I use that doesn't have a nuclear reactor. But there we go, just getting everything sorted so that it'll be ready to land. And as I promised to keep all the explosions in, check your staging. Always check your staging. So, take 2. And here we go. This is just launching the last thing that I'm sending to Eve for the moment. Now, the central ship is essentially a probe ship. This is a probe mothership that I've designed. Now, the little planes that was flying earlier, you can see this has 8 4-mounted to each side of it, and it has a cargo bay, and inside the cargo bay it has 4 relay satellites, and this ship is also a relay satellite on its own. So this is going to be the main ship, and then I'm going to use the 4 relays in equal orbits, not geostationary or anything fancy like that. I'm just going to put them into an equal orbit so they're all running around at the same path. And I'm going to use them for my main communications, so that I've always got communications around about Eve. And that's the plan for this one. And I can also drop the little landing ships down. So that's for a future episode. It should be 2 or 3 episodes before we get to Eve. But I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon.